That's the thumbnail for the video.
Howdy ho, friends and foes, and welcome to Dads on Life, your weekly episodic show on parenting from a male perspective. I'm your host, Jay Miles, and with me are my co-host, Keith Hogan.
Buenos dias.
Doug Hamadike.
President as always.
Dad Holloway.
Good morning.
And Dave Dusenberry. Today we're going to be talking about a significant, rising significant issue in the U.S., and that's critical race theory. Now, it's a commonly held belief that critical race theory is a college-level theory. It doesn't really trickle down into elementary education or high school or anything like that, but there's obviously some interweavings of that kind of thing into at least high schools. It's at least gotten down that far in some cases. It is not that I've really seen K through 8, and if it's in high schools, most of the time it's the upper classes. But let's see where we go with this. Who wants to kick us off?
Okay, since you're all jumping in, I'm the least prepared, but I'll throw something out there. I'm going to make one statement that could take us down 6 different rabbit holes. We're not going to go down any of them because we're going to go down this one as much as anyone. Throwing around the expression CRT in our society is the same thing, if you ask me, as the expression defunding the police. Mm-hmm. Why I say that is because there's a very fringe element on the left and even a little bit on the right, very fringe, that actually wants to do that. It's like, 14 people in the entire United States. Most people have no interest in that. The expression is completely wrong, but it's completely misinterpreted and bastardized for political means. Mm-hmm. The same thing is true with CRT. Well, it's not quite the same, but in my opinion, people have freaked out by the expression when if I understand it correctly, what the desire is to simply teach in schools that racism has been systemic in our society since day one and before. And here are the impacts of that racism, and that we need to do things to change the course. It doesn't have to be this graduate school, doctoral level, theoretical bullshit. It actually is a fairly simple set of concepts. And I see no reason, here's my opinion, why you wouldn't want to start teaching that at the earliest ages to make sure that they don't fall into the same trap as the parents and grandparents. There, I kicked off your show for you. You may go, and I'm going to leave. No, just kidding.
Yeah, fine. I mean, we see it in a lot of different other ways as well, I guess in schools, and it also involves testing, which I know you already have an opinion on, Keith. And
no.
What?
I have no idea what you're talking about.
You're talking about standardized testing.
I was kidding.
This is not where I wanted to start off, but it's in the bottom. Yeah.
You're talking about standardized testing, right, Doug? That's what you're talking about?
Yeah, that is definitely one thing is standardized testing, and culturally how people learn and or how people are in their own households that change the dynamic of a classroom because of how people are taught in their own homes. Also affect other students and the way the class is taught. So that is a definite point.
Well, I see your point, and I understand your point of, you made a point of how things are taught at home. You have when it comes to, for lack of a better word phrasing, bigotry, racism, hatred, and prejudice, there are a certain amount of people we really cannot trust to teach in their home things when it comes to race, whether you want to admit it or not.
Mhm.
It's because you can't trust somebody who uses the N-word like a freaking preposition to teach their kids about race. Tell me I'm wrong.
Well, it also goes beyond that, just that also the way that people talk culturally in their home. And it's led to, I guess, some things in the area of even just calling out in class. And they're like, well, some people, you know, in the way that they're in their homes, that's acceptable and all, where other people think that people calling out in class is just like noise, and it actually like pulls them away from
Sure.
their learning. But now we've determined that some people, that, you know, it's acceptable in their culture, and you know, we actually have a problem with that in this, you know, with my son, you know, and you know, it was an interesting learn, let's say.
Yeah.
Can you go a little more into that? Would you be willing to?
Well, I just know that there's like I just thought that they were like a noisy bunch of kids and all, and the school said, well, you know, well, maybe that's the way that they find acceptable in their own household, to be able to just like shout out like when they know something. And not necessarily, I think, from what I'm told, is that it's just them, you know, shouting out answers. It's just them carrying on. So that
Is it a certain like is there any kind of cultural attachment to this? I'm
No.
just asking questions. I'm not trying to stir up trouble, but
Yeah, no. No, I just we came, you know, across some more documentation and stuff that, you know, some people think that it's you know, that's how they are at their home, so that's what they how they act in class.
right.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I'm missing the answer to Jason's question. And that is, it's one thing, my kids were rowdy when they were kids at home, but they were expected to learn
Right.
a certain amount of behavior patterns when they went to school. You know, just because they shout out and don't take turns at home doesn't necessarily mean it's a culturally driven behavior. It might be a household driven behavior, but it's I don't know any culture where just random interruptions and not having an organization when you're in the middle of education is appropriate.
I mean, further reading into this, I guess apparently some of the different things that go into CRT beyond the name are different types of teaching styles, let's say, like culturally responsive and
Mhm.
culturally sustaining and racial bias and cultural competence. And some of that does go into this is not obviously anything from the school, but further following up on the subject, you know, that we like read into, that all do dovetail into CRT teachings in K through 12. So it is like in there. You might not be calling it that, but these are teaching processes that are being taught. The other thing that I found out, well, I didn't find out, I actually went to parent teacher, was with Brendan, was like one of the things was that just the idea of that the teacher was saying, it was the history class where they were saying that not necessarily do they necessarily have to get the facts right, but the idea that they can formulate, you know, um like a well-informed opinion on something, which, let's say, I'd call it, you know, some people might think of it as like 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 a revisionist history of, as long as they could formulate why they think about something or how it came together, then well, that is meets the criteria for achieving a mark in their studies.
Okay,
So
you mentioned revisionist history. What do you mean by
I did that
revisionist
on
history?
purpose.
Well, actually, I think that's to me, that's not that far off the mark. The way I look at it is, if you think about it, Generation X, of which most, if not all of us, are a member of.
I believe we
the
are all are technically. If you go by
65,
numbers, we are.
65 is the first year of Generation X. So anybody born here before 65? Oh,
No.
well, all right. So leave out the boomer up there in the corner. But Generation X is really the first generation to really come of age and come of society after the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was only 60 years ago. Like, it's really in the scope of history, that is a mere blink of an eye. And within that time, our country is trying to somehow come to terms and work into teaching a way of sort of correcting the historical record over the prior 300 plus years that was willfully ignored,
Right.
because it wasn't accepted socially. I mean, that's a big challenge. And that's why when I see terms like CRT, I agree with Keith. I think that is a complete red meat political rhetoric term. Complete. It is designed to inflame. It is designed to get people's goat. To me, I got a better term for it. It's called history. Because pretty much that's all it is. It is history. It is now we are taking the steps to teach history from a different perspective and enlighten things that have happened in history that were willfully ignored because it wasn't accepted by society at the time. The only reason that it is now is because we are in a post-civil rights movement era. I'm all for it. I tend to believe is put the facts out as they are. Let people make their judgments. You're going to have a lot of households that are not into that. A lot.
But the future does like as kids move beyond school, it really moves into, well, even in school, maybe we've seen a lot of like tests and stuff where it definitely divides people based on race.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of stories where teachers are fired and or administering tests that separate the students based on either religion, gender, or race. And I don't think that's acceptable in the classroom. And I mean, just to teach a lesson of what we all understand, and in the future, I mean, it just leads to other things, so I don't know. I mean, they're very susceptible at this age.
Mhm.
And what they put in their head right now can't be dislodged in the future. It's very difficult, so
I mean, we've
I
seen
think it has.
we've seen countless examples in psychology and human behavior and in studies and things like that, that racism, and this shouldn't be a surprise. Racism is learned. It's not innate. Kids given their druthers, young children, I mean, really young children, you put a bunch of young kids in the same room to play together, what they're going to do, they're going to play together. They're not going to care about different skin tones because they're going to want to play with the same set of blocks. Racism is learned. So it's a learned skill that comes from whether it's societal influence or whether it's parental influence or household influence or even just social cues that we pick up as we go around amongst the people that we know, we love, we trust, or that we fear. It's all learned behavior. And I think the initiative behind what is, again, I hate the freaking term critical race theory because it should just be called history. I think the initiative of that is to share a perspective that has long since been buried and say, listen, you know what? We may ignore it, like as a historically majority white country, which we've been forever. That's why all of that stuff got buried, because we felt that it didn't apply to us and it challenged our worldview as a historically white country. Now teachers, obviously at the postgraduate level first in college, this is you're dealing with minds that are much more developed, that maybe can take a dispassionate, more analytical approach to history. And I guess the incentive now is to try to take some of that effort and move it into lower grades, which again, I think it's hard. I think teaching history is something that can evolve. We're always, anytime you teach history, you can't teach everything. You're always going to leave stuff out, right? Because history's, there's a lot of time in history, there's a lot of material. You're going to have to prioritize some information, and you're going to have to ignore others. Now, as a country, we historically completely ignored our country from the Black perspective. It's just because we just didn't feel like it applied in a majority white country. And I think now we're trying to correct that a little bit, which I'm all for. I think it's good. I think learning that maybe we weren't the best saints in the world for 200 plus years is probably a good idea and gives our kids perspective. But I could totally see how that will be a backlash amongst those that are of a more conservative bent, because by nature, people don't like to be challenged on their beliefs.
You said something I'd like to just throw in. Now, I do not believe this position, but I feel it's important to represent all the positions. You said something early in your conversation there, Dave, about how when you put little kids in the same room, they'll just play with each other. They don't care what color the skin the other one is. And that's absolutely true. I would imagine that part of the argument against bringing teachings of this history into the lower level classrooms is you almost don't want to ignite that thinking in a 4-year-old when they're blissfully unaware of the differences in colors. Now, what that ignores is that people have gotten old enough in high school and perhaps even in middle school to understand it, to see it, and to deal with it. But if that argument was made to me, I don't want to teach 4, 5, 6-year-olds that yet, because it might actually lead them to be racist when they're completely unaware of what that is.
Mm-hmm.
I would at least listen to that conversation. But the blanket across the board, we're just not going to teach it, is mind-boggling when it is in fact what you call it. It is our history.
Yeah. There's
no question it is our history. It's in the same sense. I'm going to throw another rabbit hole out there, that there should be no absolute in there. We're not going to go down the rabbit hole of the abortion topic, but for the conservative side to say, ban them all, with no thought to individual thinking or individual cases or something like that, it makes no sense. It makes it so that you don't even want to have a discussion. You just want them to go away because they're not willing to engage in a discussion.
Yeah, it makes for a less learned populace, and that's not something I agree with.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, first, I don't think that the conservatives say ban them all, but let's go back to the
I'm sorry. Did you
not true.
Did you not hear what Indiana just did? Did you not hear what Kentucky just did?
That's absolutely not true. There's a gubernatorial candidate in New York that wants to take away the exemptions for rape and sexual assault on abortion.
Our country is loaded with people who want to ban it entirely, no exceptions allowed.
I have to read up on that. I'm not familiar with that, but I would say just about everybody that I've talked to, but we'll save that for next week.
Yeah. Well, that'll make a great topic.
But I guess what I wanted to do is I want to follow up and say that, and what I've read is that this is different. I know, Dave, you're talking about the history and things that are left out. What are, like, can you give me some examples of some things that were left out of history that we didn't learn about?
Well, I mean, look, a popular example that we know of, but I know I didn't learn in school, that I learned afterwards, is what the Tuskegee Airmen dealt with, and the medical trials, and how they were purposely infected with syphilis to use them as medical lab rats. That wasn't taught in school when I was there. That is a bunch of bullshit. That is taking human subjects by the government and subjecting them to trials against their will and without their consent and stuff like that. And there's tons of other examples of using human guinea pigs amongst lower classes and races in the name of whatever it was, but it's all BS. Like stuff like that is purposely ignored because, well, that makes us look bad. So we don't, we want to make ourselves, American exceptionalism, America, fuck yeah. We want to make ourselves look great. We don't want to talk about some of the ugly stuff that we did to as far as I'm concerned, maybe not legally until a certain point in time, but full members of our country.
Yeah, well, and I agree. Some of that stuff I think it was reserved for later because I learned about the Tuskegee, the airmen study in college. But I mean, even looking at when Black people were considered 3/5 of a person,
Mhm.
that was a high school topic for us. And
But-
when you go what,
And,
So
and it's
I
funny
don't-
because that's a good one because people say, oh, well, they're 3/5 of a person, but you don't really, I mean, now it becomes a math equation. You don't really know what the societal impact of that status is. Like, it's a great concept. It's, we can see 3/5, not a full person, but what exactly did that mean? How did that affect how laws were passed? How did that affect how ordinances were passed? How did that affect how a person's freedom to move around and do what they want in their country was passed? Like, that's where discussing history can really get in. You get beyond the general concept, you get into some of the specifics about how some of this stuff really affected the people that lived it.
right. Well, and I think, at that time, it just, there were many things that in today's society and in a member society in 2022,
Mhm.
I don't understand. And I
Yeah.
don't know that I don't know that I can, but that's part of that historical progression I think that we make. And it's hard to know what people were thinking at that time unless you're there. And I'm sure there's some things that in 200 years are going to look back at us and be like, why those guys were jacked up?
Yeah.
Why were they thinking that? But it's something that we all take for normal, that
You're
take
absolutely-
granted.
I think you're right. And that's why I said at the beginning, we're only 60 years into this. Like, you look prior to the civil rights movement in the 60s, none of this stuff came to light. So all of this
Yeah.
stuff was always buried for 200 plus years. It was buried.
Yeah.
Because
Well,
and willfully ignored by the country as a whole. We're now only 60 years in, really one generation in to this world post the civil rights movement, where now we can start to unpack some of this stuff. And the stuff that's getting unpacked is challenging our preconceived notions over who and what we are as a country. And
Right.
people are pissed.
Right.
And they don't want to hear it. They don't want to.
We just went down the woke rabbit hole because people woke up and realized, oh shit, this has all been buried and we need to face the reality.
But
In-
I want to say again, like I don't know what's been buried. I mean, because my education when I was coming up, I feel like I like knowing about slavery. That was some horrible shit, and knowing about the civil rights movement, when Martin Luther King said, oh, they're much worse in the North than they are in the South, and showing what they did to him in Chicago. I remember seeing those videos, and those were things on the news. I saw clips, of course. I wasn't there for the real thing, but and I remember learning about this. We say it was only 60 years ago. I remember learning about this when I was 20 something in college, and going, "Oh my God, that was like 20 years ago." I mean, it was a lot different. So I don't. From my perspective, I guess I don't see all the things that are hidden. I mean, I think it's just people are becoming more conscious of it.
I want to say, isn't the concept of what's now referred to critical race theory? It's based on a book that came out in, what was it, 1978,
Something like that. Yeah. Yeah.
right? So,
Yeah.
Chad, that kind of goes along with what you were talking about. Like, this method of reviewing some of these historical topics that were buried is a very, very, in terms of history, a very new thing.
Mhm.
And we are going to have aspects of our country that are more accepting and adaptable and willing to learn new things, and we are going to have members of our society that don't want anything to deal with it. So, and I think that's kind of where we are with some of these teachings. Like, now we're trying to, you start at the college level, and now we try to filter, again, gearing the lessons to your audience. Like, I'm not gonna go into the rapes and murders in the South through the 1800s to a bunch of 4-year-olds. That's just not appropriate. But there are lessons that you can take in terms of societal impacts to kind of work with kids to, to promote inclusiveness and getting together. I believe that. I think I'm not a teacher, but I know enough teachers that know how to gear their lessons to their audience in order to be able to get the lesson across.
Let's take a quick look at my white bread Homedale upbringing and what I was taught going to the Homedale school system, where, as I said before on the show, the very first time a classmate of mine was a person of color was in high school. I distinctly remember being taught about slavery in the United States and how it ended after, not so much with the proclamation, but at the end of the Civil War.
Mhm.
And there was some discussion about race and riots and things like that and rebellion in the 50s. And we learned about Dr. Martin Luther King. And the way it was portrayed in my school was that was the end of racism. When the Civil Rights Act was passed, it was all done. It's been removed and there's no lasting effect. And now everybody lives happily ever after, kumbaya.
Mhm.
And that is why the people who have created this thing that's now called CRT they're trying to advance it, because
I don't know.
in fact, it's not so much that we did a poor job of teaching racism from the past. It's we will not acknowledge that it is systemic, that it is continuous and pervasive, and that by being as racist as we were for the last 200 years, we've set a whole group of people back decades and decades from the progress that they would have made otherwise.
Yeah.
That's and you're right, Dave. We're not going to go and talk about tortures and rapes and killings and lynching to 4-year-olds. That is what the conservative fringe wants you to believe.
Right.
And that's why we have to eradicate all of this. We can't do any of this because if they're going to do that, it's going to be terrible. But most people do not understand the reason it exists. In fact, it's a college level theory and this country's pretty stupid. So most people don't have the education to understand what the hell they're actually trying to say.
Well,
And
know,
I
like,
think
you're-
some of this too. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, and some of this too is, the thing that we step into a lot is we don't see the curriculum to know, and nobody knows. And certainly there's lots of definitions. I mean, the definition that I read was of critical race theory was completely different than what you guys are talking about. And it was written by Richard Delgado, one of the founders of it, right? Back in the 70s, and he wrote a primer on it. And, so, I read some of that stuff, which is very different, I think, than what we're talking about, kind of relooking at history. And I think for us to really make have a good opinion about this and to be able to make a good decision, we really need to see what it actually is. Because I think we're still, it's the defund the police kind of stuff, like Keith introduced, which I think was a great lead in. It's this nebulous thing, and in one extreme it means really defund the police. On the other end, it means, hey, let's look at ways to enhance what they're doing and to maybe take some of the money from them and try to identify care providers that can help them in certain situations, additional training, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
But this is some different stuff. Like, so here's one thing I've picked up this morning, just reading a little bit. It says, unlike traditional civil rights, and this was written by Richard Delgado, one of the three founders of it, right, in the 70s. Unlike traditional civil rights, which embraces incrementalism and step-by-step progress, critical race theory questions the very foundations of the liberal order, including equality theory, legal reasoning, Enlightenment rationalism, and neutral principles of constitutional law. That's pretty deep.
That is
That's
very deep.
That's
And
a
I
lot.
disagree
That's a
with
lot
it.
deeper than we're talking about.
Yeah.
Right, and that's why nobody wants to teach CRT in schools. That's the point. Nobody wants to defund the police, but they're using the word. Nobody wants to teach CRT. What they want to teach is the systemic behavior and what it has done to put people back decades.
Yep.
It's not the same thing as CRT.
Well,
But kids
I know.
are learning. Well,
But this, but again, we're arguing about what's in our heads. We're not talking about what the curriculum somebody's taking, and I get, from my perspective, I want to see what's going into the school.
That's absolutely not true.
So I will,
Because I
Oh,
will
I-
tell you here, excuse me. That is
Mm.
absolutely not true. You want to talk about transparencies of curriculum. I will give you a perfect example of transparency of curriculum. Okay? Here in Old Bridge in 1996, right after the high schools were merged, Drew Devine, a high school teacher in the district here, high school history teacher in the district here, introduced a curriculum that he had learned at Monmouth University called Holocaust and Prejudice Reduction. He introduced the curriculum. Now, Doug, you have brought up a point of it should be looked at. It was. In most school districts, you can't just wait, whoa, hold on. You cannot just introduce a curriculum. It has to be approved by the board.
Yep.
And when changes are made to that curriculum, it again has to be approved by the board. The course was changed through Conscience of Humanity, and Chad, you brought up the word conscience. Now, the curriculum, as I took the course, it was half the year we spent studying the Holocaust, and then the second half of the year was spent learning, the civil rights movement and the whole murder in Mississippi and all that stuff. Now it has morphed into include LGBTQ issues, ableism, things like that. So, but you want to talk about transparency? That is transparency. It was introduced by the board. It has been discussed in this town. There's still discussions about it. So, and this again, it's a history course. It's not technically kind of theoretical based ideas like CRT still trends to be. You're talking about history. There are deniers, absolutely, but the Holocaust happened. The murders of Mickey Schwerner, James Chaney, and Andrew Goodman in Mississippi in 1964
happened.
by a sheriff who was also the leader of the local KKK happened.
Yep.
The murder of George Floyd happened.
Yep.
The shootings in a gay club in Orlando by a Muslim happened. You want to conveniently sweep these under the rugs and not teach them, that's fine. But don't sit here and say that we should trust parents who turn around and tweet that I will shoot anyone who teaches my kids about gay marriage. You can't trust these people to teach their kids. Because you talk about a course like Conscience of Humanity, when you have some parents who need the course themselves, but you want to trust them to teach their kids about racial issues?
Hold on, let me throw in one point. And again, this is kind of who I am as the HR person and the mediator and such. The way you're saying it is very interesting because I don't think the people who are suggesting that we implement a curriculum that includes something like CRT or pieces thereof are saying it because parents are failing to teach it at home. I think they are saying it because it's part of history. I don't think anybody is trying to legislate or even suggest how parents should teach their kids at home. There's a very valid argument, which I do not agree with, but I understand, that says if a parent does not want their kid to learn about gay marriage, then they shouldn't have to learn about gay marriage. I get why they would want to have the argument. I do not agree with it, but that to me is separate from whether or not we put concepts about racism into standardized curriculum.
Okay,
What I'm saying is that we would need to review the curriculum to be able to speak with authority on it. And you have your idea from high school. You said you were in high school, right? When all this was going on, that's a long time ago. Things have changed. And certainly people, you can get somebody that says they're going to shoot somebody if they teach a kid about this, but I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting that for us to be able to have a much better conversation about this, we really need to see the curriculum, because it's very easy to see and again say what's in here, but it's like to go back to Keith's example again, it's like defund the police. What's in the bill that they're trying to put forward? Are they going to pull $6 billion out of the New York City Police Department and nothing happened, or are they going to do something else with it?
So
I mean,
one
You're
thing I
not-
want to
but
okay,
you're-
go ahead.
let me tell you, inform you and remind you of one thing, that class isn't core curriculum. There is no opt-out. There's not a need for one. It's a senior level only high school course. It doesn't need to, you don't need to say, I don't want my kids teach that. Well, don't have your kid take the course. It's that friggin' easy.
Jason, what course are you talking about?
Holocaust and Prejudice Reduction, now Conscience of Humanity, is a senior level history course. It's an elective, just like taking auto shop. It's
Yeah.
not for curriculum.
Gotcha.
So don't take it.
Yeah.
But why should you, but you shouldn't deprive kids that might want to learn that either.
Yeah, agreed.
Could cause a problem, honestly, because let's be honest, if you don't, to an extent, if you don't teach history and you don't teach these things or talk about these things, what's the famous saying? History's doomed to repeat itself.
Sure.
Because clearly it has over our lifetime, from the end of the civil rights movement to now. Now let's turn around and take a look that there's a debate going on the skin color of the Little Mermaid.
Yeah,
People are freaking out because they made the Little Mermaid
true.
a black girl. Come on.
It's like what was I gonna say? So we were talking about in addition to just like ways that we can incorporate some of the teachings of what's called critical race theory, but was actually should be called history. How do we teach some of these things and different concepts to different, how do we introduce this in a way that people aren't going to freak out? Well, one way we can do is we can provide some age appropriate concrete examples. I found one a few years ago, and I didn't know about this until a few years ago. Thanks to the internet, I now know it. And I'll mention the term and I'll see if anybody knows what it is. Is anybody familiar with the concept of redlining?
yes.
Okay. Is that something that you were taught in high school?
No, I was not.
No.
I wasn't. It's something I only became familiar with over the last few years. And so redlining is the concept of basically putting certain structures or certain systems or certain things in certain areas to exclude people of different race and ethnicity. It's a city and township and area planning layout system that, well, when you think about it, we want to talk about how racism is systemic in the US. How often do you see cities getting replanned? Those plans and those lines were made a long time ago. Neighborhoods are built up, are based around those imagined borders, and that's how society grows up. And that just reinforces itself. Like, that's not something like people aren't going to go back and like, oh yeah, you know what? We totally did that. We should just change the whole plan of the city and move buildings around. That doesn't happen. That is a decision that was made at a certain time that has economic, societal, all kinds of repercussions going on today. And it's something that is really a matter of ignorance amongst a lot of people. It's something that I mean, I'm reading article after article. It's something that just wasn't taught. It was a decision made in private amongst whoever, And that is something that we deal with today. And I see it today. I mean, look, I'm in the Mercerville section of Hamilton. I'm on a really nice street. It's really nice. I have Trenton right next door to me. And you can tell by going around this town where the imagined borders are, what parts of the city have these services and what parts don't. You know, that is something that totally applies to this type of teaching. And unless you're taught it, this goes to your point, Jason, where if you're not taught history is doomed to repeat itself, we tend to fall on our societal norms, things that we see and accept everything, the things that we see in our reality every day, we tend to accept as being what should be. And unless we are taught otherwise or shown otherwise, we will continue within that realm of what we see is what we believe. Societal norms will hold over unless you are, unless you are shown otherwise. You know, and I completely just lost my train of thought. I have no idea where I'm going with this, but I just want to I want to bring up that point.
Well, and I would even say that goes along with gerrymandering.
Yeah,
How the
absolutely.
politicians do that stuff.
Absolutely.
I was just gonna say that, Chad. Yep. I was
Yep.
bringing up gerrymandering. I was, as soon as he said redlining and then he explained it, of gerrymandering literally right in my head immediately.
Yep.
Yeah, good point.
But and let me just throw this in too. So, and these are just some notes from earlier, right, that I took. So what these guys in the 70s in critical race theory wanted to do was they wanted to combat subtler forms of racism. So it says realizing that new theories and strategies were needed to combat the subtler forms of racism that were gaining ground, early writers such as the three put their mind to the task. And so what the three tenets that they have put in here are: first, racism is ordinary, not aberrational, normal science, the usual way society does business, the common everyday experience of most people of color in this country. Second, most would agree that our system of white over color ascendancy serves important purposes, both psychic and material. So there's the way whites feel about themselves is very different than the way blacks feel about themselves. And what we have is different than what they have. What whites have is different than what blacks have. And then the final theme is it's all social constructed. And I think that's the part where because they look at this as an activist theory, they say. So that's where you can come in and you can kind of change. Every day you have to think about how you're doing these things, but how you're interacting with people of color. And that's how you can make the change, because it's an activist methodology, if you will.
And that makes a lot of sense, because, you know, given our druthers and we just go about our unconscious way without actually putting conscious thought and effort into something, we just go on autopilot, and we tend to mirror those around us, you know.
Yep.
Monkey see, monkey do. You know, to actively make a change, you actually have to put conscious thought and effort into it, and you have to reinforce that, and you have to be consistent about it. And when you have 200 plus years of history that says, you know, hey, we as white folks in the society, we have around us this certain level of status and this certain level of being, and it's always been that way for 200 plus years. And now, you know, 60 years into this new world, that change don't come easy.
Yeah.
That change does not come easy. And there's a lot of subconscious and unconscious stuff that goes along with that unless you put conscious thought and effort into it, you're just going to keep going on the same cycle. So that makes a lot of sense.
Right.
Yeah. Well, and some examples of some of the things that kind of I'm thinking about now is they're talking about, like, you know, in a 4th grade class, you know, a white kid versus a black kid raise their hand. When are they called on? You know, when a person goes to hand $5 to a clerk to pay for something, what happens? Do they smile and make small talk, or do they just get the change and hand it back? Yeah. And those are the things that they're talking about. That's a much more subtle form, but that are evident everywhere.
And it's funny because, and that is, when you think about it, that's a fantastic example, because I'll throw this out at you. The subjects of critical race theory, as I hate that term. The challenge is not just getting your students to learn it. The challenge is having your teachers teach it, Because
Right.
there's a lot of unconscious and subconscious, as you were talking about, on the part of the teacher that maybe they're not conscious of. So that comes across when you are teaching your students. You know, it's really, to go to Keith's term, it is a woke term.
Right.
I am now woke to what I am doing. You know, I always accepted it as right and just and fine. And now I'm realizing, crap, what I've been doing has been really hurting people, not in a physical way, but in an exclusionary way.
And not in an intentional way either.
Yeah. And now, in order to avoid hurting people, I need to change my ways. Some people are much more keen to do that, and some people aren't.
I just learned a term that I've used my entire life is rather derogatory, and I had no idea all these decades, the term gypsy.
Mhm.
I always thought, you know, somebody couldn't stay in one place for very long, kind of like me. You know, I would affectionately, I thought it was affectionately referred to them as gypsies. But in fact, a lesson that was never taught in my schools, but it was taught to me less than 6 months ago, was that they couldn't. They were actually they were running from persecution, and that's why they were wandering all the time and were nomadic in their existence. This group of people, I didn't even know it was a group of people.
Yeah, we had a group of gypsies come into the hospital when I was younger, one of the hospitals I worked at. But they came in, they had a family member in the hospital, and the thefts went up. The security was running around all the time because that's what they do, is they go in and they'll for example, make bids, construction bids on properties, take the down payment, and they get a bunch of people to do that, and then they'll leave the area.
Wouldn't it make more sense? I hate to challenge what you just said, Chad, but it sounds to me like there is a group of people within a culture of people that come from that part of the world that behave that way, but it is not a behavior that I would say is completely, everyone is represented in that way. Not everyone in that group of people is going to steal, just like not everybody in a Black community is going to steal, or white community is going to steal. There's always a subset of people who are lawbreakers. But the term gypsy refers to a culture of people.
Yeah.
And most of them are very good people, just like most of every category of very good people.
Well, my understanding was it
Like
was
last president. Oh God, that was terrible.
There's also several areas. People think gypsies are usually come from one concentrated area. No, they don't. There's Irish gypsies. It's mostly European. There is
Romanian.
a couple of sects.
Yeah.
Yes, Romanian. There is a couple, and there is actually a couple of sects of them in the U.S. now. Now, there's one thing I'm going to bring up. I don't know if anybody's ever heard about it, seen it. I know I saw it a couple of times. There was an experiment by a teacher by the name of Jane Elliott, back in 1968, right after she came up with the idea, right after Martin Luther King was assassinated. And these were young kids she did it with. This was not, these were elementary school kids. She did an experiment where she segregated her class by eye color.
Yeah, I remember that.
It was called The Class Divided. I would recommend, if you haven't seen it, or if you haven't seen it in a while, maybe go check it out. It's very, very interesting, and it definitely shows you where some of the mindsets were in the country, and to an extent still are, to be honest. But yeah, it's very moving, and at times very hard to watch. But yeah, that's an interesting one.
Yeah, I
What's
remember
up?
that. It was good. It was a good. Got some great examples in it, I think, and it was a good study that she did. I remember it from college.
I think we know what, we probably saw it in the Holocaust prejudice reduction class, or maybe junior year, but I remember seeing it in high school. I'm pretty sure. Definitely saw it in sociology in college too, but like I said, very powerful. Anybody have anything they want to add before we're actually start to wrap this up? Because I'm sure we probably could go on for another hour.
Well, I would just like to say, you know, it's kind of one of those things like there's a lot of confusion and kind of the definition is all over the place. I think we've had a good discussion about it today. You know, I'm gonna stick with what I said earlier, and that's, you know, I would really need to see the curriculum to make a good evaluation because, you know, I still, you know, we can sit here and we make assumptions about what it is, but I don't know what it is until I see it. And then I think we could talk a lot more. But at the same time, you know, it's something interesting and it's getting some good some good press, and whether one is supportive of it or not, we're talking about it.
Yeah, I think that's good. I think the desire to go beyond the buzzword and actually look at the meat and potatoes of what's being discussed, I think that's important. You know, get away from the, you know, emotional lash out rhetoric of, you know, this term, it's so scary, blah, 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 and actually get into the meat and potatoes of what's being discussed and why, and look, when it comes to the curriculum, we can debate that. We can debate certain aspects of it. We can say, hey, you know, I agree with this, I don't agree with that, and blah, 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 but actually get into the nuance of it rather than dismissing it outright in a fear-mongering tactic. I think if we could get to that place, I think that'll be good.
Yep.
It's ironic you mentioned that, Dave. It's a fear-mongering thing. Because that will fear-based, fear-mongering, fear-based concepts, fear-based theories will lead us down the rabbit hole we're probably going down next week. And another quote unquote scary term, comprehensive sexual education.
Yep.
We are definitely going to, we've kind of put discussing these two topics off just because it just, you don't want to talk about, you really don't want to talk about something like this in the middle of the or beginning of the summer when all minds are kind of shut off a little bit and things like that. But we're
Me
now
all the
getting,
time. What are you talking about?
what's that?
I said, that's me all the time. What are you talking about? I don't understand. Hey, listen, wait, before
We
we
know.
before we start to
No
even
shit,
wrap up,
Sherlock.
what I think we're missing our mandate, and that is, I'm curious, Jason in particular, but this is for everybody. What do your kids think about what do they know about CRT and this subject, and what are their opinions? I know that mine are both one of mine out of school and the other one is a junior in college, but both are very adamant that some form of subject be taught in schools because it has been woefully buried in our history. They're very adamant about it. Although I haven't had conversations with them, I'd like to talk to them more about it. But I'd like to hear what you think your kids are thinking.
My kids don't know the conceptuality of critical race theory at this point.
But do your kids understand racism?
Of course they do.
Okay, so do they know that it's a topic out there that people want to put this in their teachings?
Do they?
That's a good question. That's a good question.
Do they know about racism?
No, that's
No.
the first question. The second question is, do your girls know that there's a movement to put the subject of racism into their teachings in school?
Yeah, there is. Sure.
Okay, so they do know about it. Doug and particularly Dave, I know Dad's got an old man kid like me, but what about your kids?
So I don't know if my kids know that they want to work it into the curriculum. I'm always of the belief that whatever they're learning in school, if they have any questions about things, you know, talk to me about it. I tend to be very direct, open, and honest with my kids, much to their chagrin. But I think it tends to, we talk openly about all kinds of things. My kids are a hell of a lot more accepting about others than their general school dynamic tends to be, if my kids are an example of it, tends to be a hell of a lot more accepting of the non-straight white male dynamic that dominated my years of school. So I would think that if there is a course that's going to be introduced in their curriculum, that it will be potentially more accepted and more beneficial because the school tends to have that mindset.
Doug, your kids are still in high school. What's the deal there? What are they thinking?
Yeah, I like similar to what Jason was saying. I mean, they understand it, and I don't think that they're really basing much of it at this point on what is being taught in their classrooms, from what I understand. Well, not what I understand, but I mean, between going to parent teacher conferences and talking to Brendan constantly. And like I said last week, was the wall was one of the first times that we had a real conversation about some of these things. And, you know, I felt like maybe his lack of understanding some of the bigger smaller picture of the images that are presented in the movie The Wall, you know, and getting a little bit further into it than beyond what we were just watching was interesting conversation, let's say. So yeah, that was like the first time. Colin, I don't, you know, going to Catholics, well, I don't want to say just because he goes to Catholic school, but yeah, I don't think that in the school like thing outside of normal curriculum that he's had much more let's say learning than that. So, but yeah, I just think that in wrapping up, like Jason had asked, it was more or less. I think there's a lot of different facets of this. I think some of this stuff is like what is handed down from the government and what they want to be taught in schools versus what the school is actually doing, and different teaching styles and methods that necessarily aren't billed as CRT are going into the classrooms. And what do the kids take away? And what is important is, I think, a very big factor in all this. But I think that today is Sunday and you should get out and paint and change something.
Now, it's a good point, but you bring up change. The question is, we got to realize that not all change is for the better.
Nope.
We are in another critical point in this country's way of living and history and things like that. There's things that are still going on. And yes, I honestly see questioning everything as the way it should be. The thing is, there are some people who ask questions, who ask them from a narrow or closed-minded viewpoint.
Mhm.
And as I said, many of them are some of them are the people who could benefit from courses like CRT or a course like Conscience of Humanity, as it's taught in Old Bridge and aptly named. They could probably benefit, them and their children could quite possibly benefit from it the most. So from all of us here at Dads on Life, take care, everybody. And as always, Keith, eat.
Chomp chomp.
Have a good one, guys.
Have a good week.